On the last Saturday of October, just as the veil between worlds is sheer enough to allow passage of all manner of otherworldly travelers, something special takes place in Meade County, Kentucky. A celebration of the life and commemoration of the death of Leah Smock, the Battletown Witch, the only woman that history tells us was burned alive in America for the crime of witchcraft, and it happened here in the Bluegrass State. In 2022, we were honored to speak at the inaugural Battletown Witch Festival. Tonight, you'll hear that presentation in full as we discuss just a few instances of those and that which has been called witches in and around Kentucky. Additionally, we take a few questions from the audience, and festival organizer Annie Hamilton Edmond tells us the story of Leah Smock, the Battletown Witch, and talks briefly on the UFOlogical history of the area. While MIK were unable to attend the festival this year, we send our best to both organizers and festival goers and can't wait to join you again in 2024. For now, under the moonlight and by the fireside this evening, Midnight in Kentucky presents, live from the 2022 Battletown Witch Festival, A Brief History of Kentucky Witches, Part 1.
Night owls of all times, places, spaces, and ages. Even though we are gathered here under this beautiful Kentucky sky this afternoon, the full moon has risen once again, and you are listening to the Midnight in Kentucky podcast. My name's Ben, I'm the host, and all of you guys make some noise for the folks at home. Let them know you're as real as you can be. Thank you guys so much. These are my co-hosts this evening. Everybody speak up when you feel like it. There will be time for questions and comments and sharing of experiences at the end of the show, though. Tonight, in case any of you guys aren't familiar with the show or aren't familiar with myself, I'm a paranormal, supernatural investigator from Russell Springs, Kentucky, about 2 hours away from here, but I ventured all over the state of Kentucky and all over Appalachia. I know that there's some contention over how that's pronounced these days, but rest assured I am from Appalachia, or Appalachia, however you choose to pronounce it. I've traveled all over the Appalachian Mountains, all over the United States, looking into the supernatural and unexplained. And frankly, I just love weird and strange stuff, and I think that's something everybody here can get behind, right? All right, so in talking this evening, we are going to discuss the long history of magic and witches here in Kentucky. And I want to start out by just asking you guys a question. What is a witch? Cool. Very sure. Very true. Someone with magic. Perfect. Anybody else? A not normal person. Very true. Normal in quotations. Right.
Someone who might have been known in a different culture as a shaman.
Very true. That's a great one. Somebody who may have been known as a shaman in a different culture. That is perfect. So, we talk a lot in paranormal and supernatural research about out west and about up north. But in my time, which has pretty much been my 31 years here on this plane, of investigating these things, we hear a lot about Area 51, we hear a lot about Roswell, we hear a lot about Washington for Bigfoot, for Sasquatch, Point Pleasant for the Mothman, things like that. I would wager that Kentucky, specifically in all the Appalachian Mountains, are one of the biggest hotspots for the unexplained in the world. Be it UFOs, cryptids, people professing supernatural powers, no matter what. It seems like it all comes home to Kentucky. And in doing research, I have found so much about Kentucky that this was the origination point of so much of the strange things that have entered into our pop culture lexicon today. For instance, the term little green men, which has been passed around in so many movies and so much, comes from right here in Kentucky, from the Hopkinsville encounter. And it was no surprise to me to find out that the only witch, quotations, to be burned in America happened right here in Kentucky. Of course, it's Kentucky. So we're going to be talking a little bit about magic and a little bit about witches tonight and the long history of witches and of magic in Kentucky. And we do have a long history from before Europeans entered the state, the indigenous people were practicing their own forms of magic. The Hopewell, who came before indigenous peoples, as we know them, were practicing magic. Some practitioners of magic to this day say that the Hopewell people opened a portal over Kentucky, or in Kentucky, or in the Appalachian Mountains, that allows for all of these strange and wonderful things that we know Kentucky to be what it is. But before I get into that this evening, I want you guys to experience the story of the Battletown Witch, which I know several of you already know, but I know that there is an excellent speaker here, one of the organizers of the event, Annie Hamilton, who is going to share with us, and for our listeners, the story of the Battletown Witch, which I can't get enough of. So everybody give it up for Annie, and I just want to thank you guys again for having us, and for all the organizers for inviting us. Thank you guys so much. You may have to kind of talk into that.
Hi guys. So I had a bit of the witch striking this morning. Woke up, had my back go out, and I got to spend some time at the hospital before I came in to see you guys this morning. But we're going to make sure that nothing's stopping us today, because we're trying to give Miss Leah Smock a better name and give her all the friends that she did not get afforded in life. So, who did not get to hear the story of the Battletown Witch earlier? You guys didn't? So, I'm sorry if you guys hear it 4 times today, but we just can't stop telling it. So, he touched on it a little bit earlier about like Kentucky and the supernatural and stuff. Did you all know that the Appalachian Mountains are the oldest in the world? That the cave system that runs underneath Mammoth Cave and here and all of that is some of the oldest points in the world. And the reason why they say it's so full of supernatural and the brambles are so big and it's so hard to come into is because the world just didn't want people in it because something else was already there. And that's why it's so dark around here and the trees are so tall and the sinkholes are so big because there's something else already there. So when we talk about witches and healers and things, it was called greening magic, or it was called something else for the people that accepted it. So we have a long story and history of witches in Kentucky. Now, when we talk about Leah, she's the Battletown Witch, but she only got to live in Battletown for 2 years. She, out of all of the rumors and things that spread about her, were from the 2 total years that she lived there. She's actually from Indiana. So her father bought 300 acres and decided to settle for the timber to make his barrels because he was a cooper. Well, they didn't do the same things that we did now, and a shyster sold him and another man by the name of John Greer the same property. So they came in with a strike against them right off the bat because through no fault of their own, they had to figure out who owned the property. So that was where it all started. Maybe the animosity started there. Maybe people were afraid of Leah. We'll never know because we're never going to be able to meet any of these people. So Leah had a long history of being just a little bit different. And part of it was probably because she was a little bit smarter than everybody else in the room. She knew a little bit more. She could sense a little bit more. She could tell people were really ill and if they were going to pass. She could divine the weather. So that's why her father's garden was always better than everybody else's. She could pick the best trees. So his cooper barrels held together better. So whenever everybody else around her was having trouble with the harvest, their barrels were falling apart, things like that. Well, Leah had witched them, you know? So it got so bad that they say she might have been too smart, or she just might have had to leave school because it got so bad. So she came home and she just retreated into the forest because for the longest time she had no friends. So she went about her ways being in the forest. She'd always be surrounded by animals. Just think about a Disney princess, because people would see her in the woods and she'd be surrounded by coyotes and bobcats and deer and snakes. Things that were normally not attracted to people would just hang out with her. And they still do today. We'll talk about that later. I'm sorry if I keep saying so many times. There was one day in July of 1840. August of 1840. Her family, it was her mother, her father, her brother and sister decided to go to the nearby Staples, which is now part of Battletown. And her neighbors took the opportunity from watching her house that they were going to do something about Leah once and for all. So they took her, tied her hands and feet, and put her in the smokehouse. And then they set the smokehouse on fire. And Leah perished that day. The entire smokehouse went. Some say her mother just had to stand there helpless while it burned down. And that, everybody thinks, is the story of Leah Smock. But that's just the beginning of Leah's story. Leah came back 3 days later. Her mother, who was also rumored to be a more powerful witch but was better at hiding her powers, saw her 3 days later. And the only thing she kept saying over and over again is, why didn't you use your powers? Why didn't you use your powers to get out? So her father was watching as the town people were getting more and more suspicious of her mother, who was talking to her dead daughter for days outside this burned down smokehouse. Not only did the neighbors have that guilt weighing on them of what they did, but then they had to watch her poor mother talk to her ghost. So instead of perpetuating these rumors, her family took her body when they could get it, because it took 3 days for this structure to burn out so they could get her body, and buried it in an unmarked grave on the back of their property. Well, her neighbors kept riding past, and like I said, was it a witch or was it guilt? But they would see Leah standing out there when they drive past. And they kept coming back, and they kept seeing Leah. So what they did is they went out to her grave and dug down 3 feet and piled it with stones to make sure that she stayed in her grave. They wanted to make sure she stayed there because they wanted her to stop haunting them. Leah couldn't be held down by even the most powerful rocks. These were big, beautiful, white oolite limestone rocks. And a lot of people realized that that's very powerful in the supernatural community. Well, a hunter came by a couple days later, and he saw beautiful white robe, long hair, tassels tied to her wrist and her waist, floating over a grave, just covered in a purple aura, with a venomous snake sitting over her grave. And Leah has been seen with snakes and with animals all around her grave the entire time. She has been seen up to and including 3 years ago. Now, the cemetery where she's at is no longer accessible. It's way back in the woods. We don't want anybody going there because all of the wonderful things about getting turned around in the woods and your car not starting, very pop culture Blair Witch things, have all originated back there with her before it was even out in like the public where people were saying about that. Cars wouldn't start, cameras wouldn't work, electricity goes. You get lost, you lose time. So it's incredibly interesting that all of these things that are associated with horror movies and witches and things like that have all existed since 1840 with a woman that was unjustly killed, with a woman named Leah Smock that we actually know now as the Battletown Witch. So thanks, guys.
Thank you so much, Annie. Give it up for Annie one more time, guys.
That was awesome. That was the best telling I've heard of the story thus far, and I've listened to several over the past few months. So just the 4 books. So there's so much there, right? And this is one of the things that interests me the most about these types of events. You know, as Annie was saying, there's so many little things there that echo again and again in so much of supernatural stories of encounters with these types of things, and throughout pop culture. There's the car not starting, there's the missing time, there's the sighting of a woman in a long white gown, you know. And we're talking about this a lot in studies of the supernatural. Why does it seem like these pop culture events echo again and again? And in response to that, I say, well, they have to start from somewhere. We have to be getting this stuff from somewhere, right? We have to be learning that this is the way that we engage with these things, whatever these things are, this unexplained nature of the world that we are constantly engaging with. You know, I talk a lot on this show, and I say that the age that we are moving into now with so much documents coming out about strange things, with authorities confessing that strange things are happening and they don't know what it is. We are moving into an age where if you haven't had an encounter with the otherworldly yet, by the end of your life you probably will. And I know that that sounds strange, but again, I talk to so many people and the conversations start out, well, if these things exist, then why haven't I seen them? Within 10 minutes, they're talking about a ghost encounter, a UFO encounter, or a cryptid encounter that they just forgot about. But getting back to Kentucky and getting back to these things, you know, as we've said many times, Kentucky does have a long history of magic and of witchcraft. The family of Aleister Crowley, for example, is from just a few hours away from here. We have the legends of indigenous people working magics. We have so much magic here and so many stories of witches and of magic. You know, as Annie was saying, and this is something that I touch on a lot, so I'm so glad you mentioned it, the Appalachian Mountains are theorized to be the same mountains as those in Scotland, the Scottish Highlands. And for you history buffs, what comes from the Scottish mountains? The Fae. Long histories of stories with the Fae and of otherworldly things, and of course, practitioners of magic. So when we come here, when we find ourselves in Appalachia, thousands of years later, of course we bring with us our traditions of magic and of talking to these things and of communicating with these things and asking these things to help us in our daily lives. You know, we have the tradition here in the South and in Appalachia of the seventh son of the seventh son being able to heal and have supernatural powers. We have faith healers. We have charm doctors, as they are phrased. There's an excellent folklore from Leah County from 1878 to 1978 of a family of male witches who served their community as blacksmiths, as horse breakers, you know, all of these mundane things, but also they healed people. People would come to them, they would remove warts, they would remove sicknesses, and they did works of magic. In talking about magic, as Annie was saying, you know, there is that tradition of greenie magic, and to me that's kind of separated into two separate things. There is inherent magic, meaning that someone can work magical acts themselves, and there is sympathetic magic, meaning that you use sigils, images, spells, things of that to work your magic. And in saying that, I would like to get into one of my favorite stories of Kentucky witches. And you know, sadly, witches aren't always painted in the best light, right? I mean, rarely ever are witches painted in the best light. So we're going to be dealing with some stories tonight that don't necessarily paint witches as, you know, the people that I have come to know. Most of the witches I've met are the nicest people you're ever going to meet in your life. For some reason, though, we've adapted this story arc of them being in league with evil forces or just forces beyond our knowledge. This brings us to the witch tree of Louisville or Louisville or Lawville, however you want to pronounce it, Kentucky. This witch tree is said to have been a maple tree that stood on 6th, it still stands on 6th and Park Avenue in Old Louisville, and this was said to be the meeting place of a coven of witches in Louisville. This meeting place was where they held their meetings. They worked their magic, they did their spells, and honestly, it was probably a place where the townspeople who were a little bit more strange or not normal came to meet and came to feast and came to eat. This slowly devolved into, of course, that they were in league with whatever, an evil. So in 1888, the city council decides to cut down the maple tree. They're going to use this maple tree, ironically, for a maypole, for a pagan or a witch celebration called Beltane, or May Day, as we know it these days. When they cut down this tree, the witches told them, this coven of witches said, don't do it. We want our tree. Of course, you've met at this tree, you've raised family around this tree, you've eaten with your friends around this tree. They wanted their tree. So they told them, please don't do this. We want our tree. Of course, you know, people being what they are, city councils being what they are, authorities being what they are, what do you think happened? They cut down the tree. The tree gets cut down. And for a while, nothing weird happens. 11 months to the day, the tree's cut down. One of the most devastating tornadoes hits Louisville, Kentucky. No one's killed. Everyone's fine. But it definitely destroys buildings, definitely destroys property, It definitely destroys, most of that district of Louisville. And from that time, there grows another tree. This is called the Witch's Tree. It still stands at the corner of 6th and Park Avenue in Louisville. You're welcome to go see it. But if you go, I suggest you take some type of trinket or gift, because witches are kind of like crows. We like shiny things. We like baubles, we like jewels, and since that time, to placate the supposed witches' spirits, people have bought jewelry and earrings and baubles and necklaces of all kinds to hang them on the tree where they hang today. And perhaps the witches are placated, maybe, but the reality of the situation is when we do these things, when we cut down people's homes, when we invade people's homes, who knows what we are inviting just by being nasty humans? Because let's be real, we do a lot of awful things as the human race. And in doing this, I do believe that we invite these things. I've heard more stories of the supernatural occurring in places and land masses that are contested or have been fought on, like today, that for some reason, these things echo. They keep coming up, whether it's werewolves or Sasquatches or UFOs. The unusual and the unexplained likes the places where we've not been so nice to each other, which may be the reason that the Witch's Tree is still, to this day, one of those landmarks where people go to celebrate, the unknown and the craft, as it were. Annie has already told us the story of Leah, which was awesome. I was going to share that with you guys next, but we've already heard it. So I'm going to move on to another of my favorite witches. And this witch, as we've already talked about, is not necessarily a witch proper. The name witch in Puritan communities and in 1800s, 1700s America got passed around a lot as a term for something that we could not explain. This witch is also not native to Kentucky, but is very closely related to Kentucky through the Red River, which makes up Red River Gorge here in Kentucky. The Red River flows down into Tennessee to take us to the lair of the Bell Witch. Is anybody familiar with the Bell Witch? Awesome. Of course. So the story of the Bell Witch starts just 1 year before Leah would have been born, in 1818, in Robertson County, Tennessee, at the Red River Settlement. This is where we find John Bell, patriarch of the Bell family and leader, one of the many leaders, of the Robertson County settlement. One day, John is out hunting in the early parts of the year, and he sees a creature across the field from him. This is a creature, and keep in mind, John is a farmer, John is a hunter. He knows his land. He knows the outdoors. He looks across the field, and there's a creature standing there that he can't identify. He says it has the head of a rabbit and the body of a dog. And being, a good old country boy from Tennessee, he raises his rifle, and he shoots at the thing. Probably not a wise decision, but a decision he makes nonetheless. So the creature disappears. The creature runs off into the woods, and John thinks this is the last that he will see of this, or the last that will come of it. That evening, the knocking starts. It's on the outer walls of his cabin. And all of his children notice it, and they say, "Dad, what's with the knocking?" And John tries to explain it. He says it's mice, he says it's animals, he says it's all these things. But in giving it attention, as with so much of this, the knocking gets louder. And the knocking gets louder, and the knocking gets louder, and the knocking gets louder. Until eventually, they're all engaging with this. They're all asking questions. They're all wondering what the knocking is. The children start to hear the knocking around their beds. All of this strange activity starts happening, and then the whispers. And the whispers start to talk about the Bible. They start to talk about religion. They start to talk about the goings-on of the Red River community. And they start to sing hymns. And of course, these whispers grow into full-blown voices. And at one point, the witch is said to have been able to recite 2 separate sermons, 13 miles apart, on one Sunday morning. The Bell family continues to be in touch with the witch. People from Robertson County start to come to talk to the witch. The witch develops an interest in Betsy Bell, the youngest of the Bell family. Betsy is about to be married, and of course the witch hates her fiancé, will not let her have time with the fiancé, constantly ruins their time together, whether it be through scratching of Betsy Belle or her fiancé, whether it be through outward aggression, or whether it just be through these loud knocks and whispers. Andrew Jackson is even said to have visited the witch at one point, and the witch is said to have drove Stonewall Jackson right out of Tennessee. Andrew Jackson left because of the witch. And there's some contestment of that in history, but you can see how popular this legend of the Bell Witch became. So finally, just 3 years later, after John's first encounter with this mysterious creature and the family's encounters with this witch, John Bell succumbs to an illness that had begun almost right after he began his encounters with the witch, and he dies. After his death, his son, John Bell Jr., finds a small vial of some type of liquid in their home. He proceeds to give a drink to the cat. The cat dies immediately. And it's upon this realization that they all kind of take into account the witch and the witch's hatred of John Bell. And that's when the witch begins to cackle and make fun of the death of John Bell. And she says, "Oh yes, it was I who poisoned John Bell." So John Bell is interred into the ground with the witch laughing, making fun, singing hymns, singing all these nasty songs about the man. And just as soon as John Bell enters the ground, the witch leaves. But that's not before she tells John's wife that she will return in 7 years. And in 7 years she returns to John Bell Jr. And he too writes of these encounters, the knocking, the whispers, the scratches, the aggression. And then she leaves again. And she says, "I will return in 107 years. And in 107 years, she returns to the most direct descendant of John Bell. And even to this day in Adams, Tennessee, the Bell Witch is said to take up residence in one of the local caves around the Bell's property. Strange things still occur in Adams. Orbs of light, mysterious creatures, missing time anomalies. So the question is, did the witch ever really leave Adams? Or is it simply our projections of our own fears bringing the witch back to us over and over and over again? Now, I mentioned caves in this story and that the Bell Witch really enjoyed staying in these caves. As you guys know, or as I hope you guys know, caves, as Annie mentioned as well, are an important part of paranormal lore and supernatural happenings, especially in Kentucky. We have one of the longest cave systems in the world, the longest cave system in the world. It runs all the way up, its tributaries run all the way up to the New York, Massachusetts region. If you trace these tributaries, you can find sources of high strangeness that align perfectly with them. Why is that? What is it with these caves that bring about these things? What lurks beneath our feet at this very instant? This brings me to another of my favorite Kentucky witch stories, and this is the story of the soul-snatching witch of the Louisville Sediment Cave. We're back in Louisville again. And you know, we think of Louisville these days as the largest city in Kentucky, but this is not how it was hundreds of years ago. It was a settlement, yes, but not that large, still filled with trees and forests and rivers and all of these things. So in Louisville, there is this cave. The cave has never been given a proper address. I wish I could tell you where you could go to find this cave, but as you guys have probably realized at this point, with so much of the supernatural, addresses are left off simply because of tourists and thrill seekers going to visit them and disturbing these things. Because it is private property, it is someone's property, of course, regardless of what witch or goblin works there. So in the mid-'80s, a group of 3 boys went out to this soul-snatching witch cave, and they decide to go in. And they tell of these legends that have been told for centuries of this witch named Mary Smith, who supposedly led a coven in the Louisville area. Perhaps the same coven as the witch tree. It's undocumented. Now, Mary Smith is said to be able to control shadows and be able to take someone's shadow. And in taking someone's shadow, it's said that she takes their souls along with it. So these boys go out. They have their own encounter with Mary Smith. They supposedly see the witch just as Leah is described, in this beautiful flowing white gown, glowing ethereally there in the cave. Only one of the boys returns. The other two, he can't say what happened to them. No one expects foul play, and when they tell that the witch stole their souls, it's shrugged off. It's shrugged off, and nobody really makes a mention of it again, other than to say that the boys were lost in a spelunking incident and that they had never returned. And this is just one of the many stories that come out of this cave, of children disappearing over and over again in the old cave in Louisville. What is it about witches and about magic and the supernatural that makes us so afraid for ourselves and our children? There are countless stories of supposed witches taking children, from the Pied Piper to this story. I have quite a bit that I would like to talk about this evening, but for the sake of time, I'm going to skip straight to my own story with a witch. And this is perhaps not witches again as we think of them, but a witch nonetheless. Where I grew up in Russell Springs, Kentucky, we have a road called the Ghost Road. And I'm sure all of you can guess what happens on the Ghost Road. Hauntings, orbs, time slips, things of this nature. I actually live on the crossroad right across from this road now, so I get to interact with these things all the time. Whether that's a good thing or a bad thing, I don't know yet. There's a house on this road that legend told of for my entire family, and I'm sure other families in the Russell County area, of the witch's house. This house was a normal house. It, for all intents and purposes, it was the same brick and mortar house that I had grown up in and that I live in now. The thing about this house, though, of course, is that there was a witch who lived there. Through the 70s, 80s, 90s, there was a witch. A witch lived there. So, about 2004, I was about 15, seeking adventure as all small town kids do at some point. I decided I'm going to go to the witch's house. It had been abandoned for probably 10 years. And I made a pact with myself. I said, well, I'm not going to break and enter. Obviously, not promoting illegal activities. Not going to break and enter. If the door's open, I'm going to go in. I'm going to see what's there. When I got there and the door was open, I really thought about breaking that pact with myself. But I didn't. I went in. And what I found there can be interpreted in many different ways, whether you want to interpret it as something totally mundane and normal or something supernatural and unexplained. What I found there was a home that was immaculately dressed. A home that somebody had just stepped out of to go to the grocery store. Nothing was out of place. There was no dust. There was nothing. It was so immaculate that I considered for a moment that maybe I should get out of here right now lest somebody come home. But I didn't. I looked around. There was still shampoo and conditioner in the shower. There was covers on the bed. Everything still worked. Still, I've not been able to explain that to myself to this day. The house was torn down maybe a year later with, as far as I know, the same immaculate dressing inside. And I still, for whatever reason, have dreams of this house, of meeting people that are long since dead in this house, of meeting friends I've lost in this house, and I can't explain it. So that brings me back to the question that I asked at the beginning. What is a witch? Does anybody have any different thoughts now that we've been through these stories and these encounters? No? Still cool. Still awesome, obviously. We wouldn't be here today otherwise. I think in all my research and all my practice and all of my strange existence here on this earth, the only thing that I can positively identify a witch as is something that we, as quote-unquote normal people, cast our aspersions onto, our hopes onto, our fears onto. Whether that be something like the Bell Witch, that we don't know for certain what it is, or whether that be someone like Leah, who was an intelligent girl with the utmost intuition, who they burned alive at 22 years old because they couldn't understand her. The witch is the unknown. The witch is what we go in search of. The witch is the great mystery. And I ask of all of you, if you can do one thing for me this season, take just a moment and put yourself in that witch state of mind where anything is possible, where magic is possible, where miracles are possible. Look out over the horizon. See if you see those orbs in the sky or those mysterious creatures in the forest. And let go of your mundane existence just for a moment as the veil thins, and celebrate the witches, not only here in Battletown, but all over America and all over the world. Not else. Thank you so much. It has been great being here with you today. I don't know how much time I got left. Got about 20 minutes? 20 minutes? Should we?
Yeah, go ahead.
Awesome. Questions? Anybody? Questions?
Or
Comments?
if you have your own
Yes,
story.
I would love to hear your experiences. We take everything, whether it be the most mundane of things, UFOs, alien abductions, whatever you guys got, I would love to hear them.
Does anybody know about, here, I'll take my-
Absolutely.
So, does anybody know where one of the most, well, right underneath Roswell, one of the most talked about and identified UFO encounters ever started at? Okay, so, anybody ever heard of the Hopkinsville Green Men? Little bit, yeah? Okay, so, I can't remember his name because I forgot my notes today, but he was a very decorated World War II fighter pilot. He was on a duty station at Fort Knox. They were just going around. They were doing maneuvers, teaching new guys, stuff like that. There was 3 of them that were in a formation. All of a sudden, a white light came out of the water and went straight up in the air. So, they broke off for security because it was during the Cold War. It was during the 50s. They broke off and they went as fast as these, I think they were Warthogs, as fast as these fighter planes could take them. They weren't things that didn't have a little bit of hitch in their giddy up. They were fast. They were fighter planes. So, this guy, who was very dedicated, very smart, level-headed, when the other 2 guys broke off, when this white light went straight up in the air, he just kept climbing and climbing and climbing. And they don't know why. He never said why. He just was trying to catch it. And he was just climbing, knowing his aircraft was going to fault and crash, and kept climbing, trying to chase this white light that he didn't know what it was, and eventually crashed over Hopkinsville. And that's what started the whole Hopkinsville Green Men UFO encounter. It started right here at Fort Knox, because most people don't realize half of Fort Knox is in Meade County, and the other half is in Hardin County. All of the base parts and stuff, but the tank ranges and all the woods are on our side. So they, when they first moved in, when it was Camp Knox, all of the military wives got in trouble because they were digging through these mounds and finding arrowheads and digging up arrowheads. And what it turned out is they were going through Native American burial mounds. So they were finding all of this stuff all through there. So Fort Knox actually started during the Civil War as Camp Knox. And at that time, people would see lights. And you got to think, this is before electric light, so it would have to be a fire. If somebody didn't live there, there was not a light that existed over there. And they would see these lights over that direction, these blue glowing whitish lights. So it's kind of weird to see all the different things that are kind of converging in one area once again. And that's my ghost story, and somebody else is to tell one now.
Thank you so much, Annie. I had heard parts of that story before. I had never heard the mounds of Fort Knox. That is very interesting. So much to do with the mounds around here and paranormal. But yes, anybody else have a ghost, UFO, alien, cryptid, just something weird? Anybody else have any weird experiences to share with us today? Don't be shy. Come right up. We're all strange. We'd love to hear about it.
We got gremlins, we got everything.
We got gremlins, goblins, ghosts, witches. Nothing? Nothing? Well, thank you guys so much. If you're jonesing for more of this, check us out online. We're at midnightinkentucky.com. Wherever you guys listen to your podcasts, we're there.
Check out Mysteries Decoded Season 3 on the CW. You'll find me on it. And until the next moon rises, Night Owls, enjoy the thinning of the veil this year. I know I'm going to. Good night.
You've been listening to Midnight in Kentucky,
a Ransom Letter Publishing podcast.
Join us on Twitter and Facebook,
Or get in contact with your questions, comments, or stories of high strangeness
at midnightinkentuckypodcast@gmail.com.